today I would like to talk about a 2020 film called Animals, and I'm going to kind of juxtapose this to a film that has some kind of similar themes, however, that were shown by the creators in a very, very different way. Lars and the Real Girl, which was a 2007 film, probably most notably starring Ryan Gosling. And I think these are both kind of lesser known films, though of the two, I'm sure more people have heard of Lars and the Real Girl. So I'm going to start off with talking about Animals. So Animals is about this young man, Paul, who is a high school student who lives with his older brother who is a police officer. And Paul is a very sensitive young boy who has two kind of close friends and a secret. His actual best friend, who is Deerhove, and Deerhove is a stuffed teddy bear that walks, talks, and is a pretty sick drummer, if I do say so myself, in their band. And this is definitely an indie film, and it feels like an indie film. It's a bit scattered in terms of plot. There are some things that seem like they don't really connect, and you really have to kind of sit and think a little bit about it to realize why they actually do connect with the overall theme of the story. In the beginning, this teenage girl that he has classes with but isn't really a friend of his dies. And then Paul has a crush on this kind of new, mysterious guy. And his brother is very concerned about him. He seems to kind of know about Deerhoof, which to him, he realizes it's an hallucination that Paul is having. And it's a coming of age story, sort of, but very, very dark. And I also kind of just want to mention that the cinematography is very beautiful. So getting back to the actual plot of the story, Paul's brother tries to bury Deerhoof, and Paul rescues him. But later on in the film, he's trying to move on from Deerhoof, so Paul throws Deerhoof into a river while just sobbing after weighing him down so that Deerhoof would sink and be dead. So Paul gets to know the new guy that he has a crush on, Akari, and that is the most toxic relationship I have ever seen in a film in my life. Akari actually encourages Paul to self-harm, and it ends up culminating in a third act scene where after they have had a physical encounter and Akari then encourages him to do something, Paul ends up having a total breakdown in the library. He is sitting on the ground in the fetal position, curled up, just sobbing, imagining that he's hugging Deerhoof, and it is heart-wrenching. He really needs his friend, so he returns to the bridge that he threw him off of in the second act, and he jumps into the river to save Deerhoof and ultimately drowns and dies, which devastates his older brother. And at that point you learn that Akari can see dead people, and he sees Paul, Deerhoof, and the girl that died in the beginning of the film. So Animals is a very kind of surrealist film that again is very beautifully shot and I think directed. The meaning could be interpreted in a few different ways. I see it as a coming-of-age tale, but I could definitely see it being interpreted for its more LGBTQ plus themes. Paul really represents an adolescent who is quickly reaching maturity and is struggling with it. Deerhoof is his best friend and is very comforting to him, and this represents his childhood. Deerhoof loves Paul and would die for him, and ultimately dies. Well, kills him, sort of. Akari represents sexuality, but also adulthood. Akari sees dead people. He encourages Paul to harm himself. This signals that adulthood is very dangerous and destructive, while childhood is warm and loving. And this is why Paul essentially retreats back into childhood and ultimately dies so that he can stay eternally young. So then we're going to move on to Lars and the Real Girl. Again, I do think this is a little bit more well known just because Ryan Gosling was in it. I think that kind of brought the film more attention. So Lars and the Real Girl is much happier tonally than Animals from beginning, middle, and end. It's just so much less depressing. Animals is a very depressing film. If you are not in a good headspace, don't watch it. So Lars lives in this detached garage from his brother and sister-in-law's house. His sister-in-law is pregnant, and this is bringing up a lot of anxiety for Lars, who is already very, very anxious and socially isolated. And Lars' mother had actually died giving birth to him, and he grew up in a household with just himself and his father, who was very emotionally distant to him. So in the film, Lars orders a kind of doll, and he hallucinates that she is a real woman named Bianca. So Gus and Karen, who are his brother and sister-in-law, are really concerned, and they take Lars to see a therapist who tells them that they should play into the delusion until it runs its course. And over the next several weeks, the entire town actually comes together to help and pretend that Bianca is real and allow Lars to work through his issues. And this culminates in him imagining Bianca's death, which honestly, on a side note, I have a lot of questions for. So does he know this is a hallucination, or does he actually think it's real? So meaning in the future when he does start to date, because it's hinted that he's going to date this girl that he works with, or woman. So when he's dating her, does he actually going to think that his last girlfriend died? Because that's sad. Anyway, back to the story. So Lars is, as I mentioned earlier, very much an introvert, but that really just doesn't do it justice. I don't know if he has social anxiety per se, but he makes extreme measures to avoid touching people, and he actually explains at one point that he finds it physically very painful to touch others. He avoids conversations to a very extreme degree. He does have a job, and he does, seem to function in society, so it's not debilitating. Though I do have to say that I like how mental illness is shown in this film, but also mental health is shown in this film, and that's more important because a lot of films show mental illness without showing mental health, in that they don't show any attempt to get help for, something that would be mental illness. I could go on about that for hours, so there's a distinction. Animals shows mental illness. Lars and the Real Girl shows mental health. Both Animals and Lars and the Real Girl depict characters who are very lonely and isolated and love-starved, who imagine someone, dear who or Bianca, to love them. The main difference is how these films express the hallucination. Lars and the Real Girl shows it from an outside perspective, with people being concerned for Lars and wanting to help him, whereas Animals shows this from Pole's perspective, with Pole interacting with the hallucination with no real help from anyone else and actually being kind of harmed by others for it. Both main characters have an older brother who is concerned about their behavior, particularly the delusions, but don't really do much about it. Lars and the Real Girl, his brother Gus is a little bit better than Pole's older brother, in that he does take him to see a therapist, and they do have a really sincere heart-to-heart, which Animals just totally lacks. The moral of the stories are alike and yet subtly different. Lars is uplifting. It's about how a single person can affect a whole town, and how a community can come together to help someone overcome their isolation. It's absurd and funny, but very deep. And then Animals is depressing. It's about growing up and the fear of loneliness, and it's equally absurd and dark, but beautiful somehow too. In the end, it's the difference in perspective that really defines these two stories. Lars gets help, which allows him to heal. Pole does not receive intervention, and he ultimately dies. And thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great day. I hope if you're watching this, we are past the great March 2020 sit-in. And stay safe, stay hand-washy, and bye.